So what's my mission? Hi, welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews, bookseller, writer, collector. And I thought it was time really to talk about what my mission is as regards to science fiction and books generally, but more specifically science fiction, because I do have a mission. And of course, in the sort of manifesto style, I really should have done this when I started the channel, but of course nobody was watching it then. There was about 3 people watching it. And now we've got sort of 3,500 plus subscribers. Then it's actually worth saying, because I do have a mission and I do have a manifesto, and I've always had one. So I guess really I should reveal what that is. And it's probably intuitively obvious, but I can focus it by saying that I've got sort of 2 aims really as a bookseller, writer, and somebody who just talks about books and doing this. And the first aim is specifically to get science fiction talked about and to get it taken seriously by readers per se, because there is a problem in that many readers will say, oh, I don't like sci-fi, I don't like science fiction. They will usually don't say I don't like SF because they've never heard that term, but it's usually because they're judging it based on what they've seen on a screen rather than what they've read in a book. And all throughout my career I've said to people, well, you've read 1984, haven't you? And they say, oh yes, but that's different. What about Brave New World? Oh yes, but that's different. It isn't different. The Handmaid's Tale? Oh yes, but that's different. It's not. They're all science fiction. It's just that the image of science fiction in the mass media that people have is pretty much based on the lowest common denominator. So that's always been my thing, to get people who don't read genre SF, things which are marketed and packaged as such, to read it and to appreciate it and to give it its day in the sun and, sort of confirm on it its place in the canon and in literature generally, because it's made a massive contribution, particularly as time goes on. More and more writers in the mainstream, writers who are not packaged and marketed as SF, will be using SF tropes to tell stories, and people think they're really original, and that really bugs me. I'm very much a pioneer, and I really want to see the people who came up with ideas first honoured and respected. And this is still late coming for genre science fiction, and it really needs to be sorted out. So that's always been one of my things, to get people to read that. And you might say this is typical of Steve, another one of his unwinnable battles, like the SF versus sci-fi battle. But I'm sorry, I just can't live that way. I have to sort of put it out there and try and do the best I can to get the justice for the genre that it deserves and the day in the sun that it deserves. So that's a really important thing for me. And of course, you could say it's futile, but then all human life is futile. We know that we're all going to die, but we don't behave that way. We carry on with our projects and things, and we do what we can. So, it's not really much of an argument to say that it's an unwinnable thing. Who cares? It doesn't stop me from doing it, and I'm going to keep on doing it. The other part of my mission is very much to get people who only read genre SF and only read from the lower common denominator end to up their game a bit, read some things which are better, more original, more sophisticated, so that the 2 ends meet in the middle, that they meet around the better written, the more original, the more pioneering SF. And and this is quite a task, and it's an ongoing thing for me, and I've been doing it for nearly 40 years, and I'll keep on doing it until I retire. And the fact is, maybe if I'm still doing this, then I'll still be doing it then. And as I say, there's going to be more mainstream stuff on the channel. It's just me getting around to it really and having the enthusiasm for it. But I want to use an example. I remember quite some time ago, and I'm looking on Amazon at the moment on my computer, which is in front of me. There was a book published called Under the Skin by Michel Faber, who's a Dutch writer who's very good. He writes all sorts of things. And I'm trying to think when it first came out, and I suppose I should look at Wikipedia. I haven't prepared any of this. And Under the Skin was published as a trade paperback original in the UK. I think it was about 2007. Let's have a quick look. And let's see. Where's his... Yeah. It's longer ago. It's 2000. Wow. Why did I think 2007? So it was 2000, and it was his first novel, and it's set in Scotland, and it's the narrative of a young woman driving around, and she's picking up hitchhikers, men. And I'm not going to tell you any more about it, but you might not have read it. If you haven't read Under the Skin and you're a science fiction reader, you really, really must read it. There's also a film of it. I'm going to flash some of that up on the screen with Scarlett Johansson. And it's a good film, actually. It's very good. It's very enigmatic. Quite different in lots of ways to the novel. And the novel was going to be issued finally as a hardcover about 3 years ago, but the pandemic was on and it didn't happen, which was a great shame. So I was a bit sort of gutted by that because I always wanted a hardcover. Faber's also written another science fiction novel called The Book of Strange New Things, which came out in 2014, which I haven't nerved myself to read yet, purely because I think it's one of the worst book titles in history. The Book of Strange New Things. It's terrible. And I get the impression it's very much in the vein of The Sparrow and A Case of Conscience. It's about religion being taken to another planet and what have you. So I will read it at some point because he does write really well. And I've read Under the Skin twice and watched the film a few times as well. So just to talk about it, when it came out, it was marketed and packaged as a mainstream novel. And it had amazing reviews. The papers and everybody went mad about it, saying how original it was. And it is a great book. It's really well written, but it isn't original in the least, quite frankly. And this is the sort of problem that we're up against in bringing those two ends of my mission together, really, because we come across that thing that Brian Aldiss said: SF's no good, they bellow till we're deaf. And if it's good, then it's not SF. Now, of course, it is so much of the time. If it's got the novum, it's got the paradigm shift, the conceptual breakthrough. It doesn't matter who writes it, doesn't matter how it's written. SF is a genre category that is definable through pulling together the different elements that create it. So Under the Skin, if you read it as a science fiction reader, you'd instantly recognize what it was. And it's actually not original at all. It reminds me of a story by Damon Knight from the 50s called To Serve Man, which was a sort of Twilight Zone episode, I think, and that was sort of late 50s, early 60s. It's quite a funny one. It's worth seeing. It also reminds me of Quatermass 4. Well, I call it Quatermass 4. I mean Quatermass, aka the Quatermass Conclusion. And it's one of the oldest ideas in terms of contact between mankind and aliens, and what alien motivations for wanting to come to Earth and seek out human beings might be. So it is one of those things. But if you look at the reviews on Amazon, and there are loads and loads and loads of them, and I remember sort of, looking at it, and it was a time when you could comment on people's reviews, and people said, oh, this is so original. And I was thinking, no, it's not original at all. It's just you've not sort of read anything. And looking at the lines from newspaper reviews here on Amazon, Kate Atkinson thought it was wonderful, painful, lyrical, frightening, brilliant. She couldn't put it down. David Mitchell liked it. Sunday Times found it profound and disturbing. And everybody sort of just loved it. And the Observer said, recalling such writers as Jim Crace and Russell Hoban, and so on and so on. And, he is good, a good writer, an interesting guy. But the fact is, this was an old science fiction trope. A very old one of the oldest ones, one of the pulpiest ones. And yeah, maybe it was better written than some similar things, but it doesn't make it original. So this is the thing. I very much feel that my mission is to sort of get people reading across the genres. And a term I use sometimes is slipstream. And slipstream is a term that we used to use a lot in the late 80s, in the sort of cyberpunk sort of period. And to me, that's post-cyberpunk. And slipstream was deemed to be, it was used as a marketing category in, Forbidden Planet. You'd go in the slipstream, and it was very, very much, you'd have a bay of books which were by people like William Burroughs and Charles Bukowski. Now, Bukowski's nothing whatsoever to do with SF, but it was books which were readable or being read by people who liked serious literary SF, but weren't SF. So that was an interesting thing. And it's a good term to bring it back, because you do see increasingly in contemporary fiction how a lot of writers now, particularly those who are sort of starting with short story collections, they're dipping their toe into more speculative things, and they're trying out science fiction stories in the same way that, years ago, every decent English, French, American, German novelist would write a ghost story now and again. It's becoming respectable to do, but it's still not respectable to label it as science fiction or SF, and that needs to be addressed. So my mission really is around those things. If you haven't read Under the Skin, do. It's very good. Excellent take on a traditional old pulp idea. If you're somebody who's just sort of come across this and you want to know what you should read, there's similar, as I say, I named a couple of things. Quatermass by Nigel Neal, and there was a novelised version of that, the only novel he ever did. And I'd say To Serve Man by Damon Knight or other sort of examples of what happens in Under the Skin. Something I do get is I get the idea that a lot of people doing, science fiction stuff on YouTube or on blogs or whatever, they're not really bothered about that thing. I'm bothered by it. But then, of course, I'm dealing with people buying books every day, and I like to see people trying stuff that they have never tried and they enjoy. Take Game of Thrones, for example. I mean, loads of people who I sold the Game of Thrones books to said to me, I'd never have read anything like this without having seen the TV series. And I was able to get them to read things like Roger Zelazny and Gene Wolfe and what have you. And that was a wonderful thing. And people are always looking for stuff to read. So it is important that, you step outside your comfort zone, read different things yourself. But also, if you're a fan of science fiction, to try and get people who wouldn't normally read it to read it. But you've just got to pick the right stuff. There's no point in going in with your sort of favourite hardcore sort of thing. You've got to go in with something lighter, something like, say, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. So, let me know, what have you done in your reading and your sort of contacts with other people to try and get them to read SF, and how has it gone down? Bye for now.